Welcome back to Movies TV Mad, and welcome to Monday's edition of the DCU Daily. Hold your horses. We're going to get to our main topic of the box office and breaking even with Superman shortly. But I want to reiterate a point that I made yesterday. We are in an era of self-indulgent writer-directors, whether it's Denis Villeneuve or Zack Snyder or James Gunn. It is your responsibility, you have a responsibility to an audience, not to yourself. You have a responsibility to your studio, who's invested money and put their faith in you to make sure they make a profit. If we look at Man of Steel, which I love, you know I love the Snyderverse and I love Man of Steel. And by the way, I believe it's utterly important to be able to criticize and critique the creatives and the movies and television that we love. Unfortunately, with these fandoms today, there isn't a place to do that. As soon as you make one little critique, they slap you down. But there's got to be a place to criticise in fandoms, and that's something that has to change both in the Gunn fandom and in the Snyder fandom and in all fandoms today, whether it's football team fandom or movie or TV fandom. They've become echo chambers, and I find that very problematic. Now, David Goyer, when he was writing Man of Steel, went to the effort of writing a great villain in Zod, like he did with Ledger's Joker, only to rob us from him and the rest of the franchise. I thought it was a very dumb decision to kill off General Zod, because he took something away. There was a bigger story to tell with Zod. He wasn't done. There's been this debate for years that Superman could have flew up, he could have done this. That's not the point. Goyer put him in a no-win scenario because Goyer wanted him to kill. He wanted Superman to kill. We had this discussion yesterday. And I believe, as I believed then, to me it wasn't a big deal. It was a new kind of incarnation. This is what they wanted to do. But I can understand why hardcore fans were very upset. You're taking a character who has got this pure mentality, who hasn't really killed in his history, and you're trying to make him into something he's not. And that's why people got upset. And really, there was no need for it. If you don't kill Zod, if Superman doesn't kill Zod in Man of Steel, a beautifully made movie, by the way, that movie makes near on $1 billion. If you just calm down a little bit on the destruction, that was WB's fault, not Snyder's or Goyer's or Nolan's, because it was WB who wanted all that action, because Superman Returns was criticised for being not action heavy enough and actually boring. So that was on WB. So there was a lot of self-indulgence all round with the Snyderverse and Man of Steel. And you know, I think about that tornado sequence all the time. I like the fact that Pa Kent sacrifices himself to keep Clark's secret. The problem with that sequence and why it's criticised is the execution. It is, again, it's not something that tremendously bothered me. But at the back of my head, I do feel it's a bit unbelievable, hard to believe that Clark Kent would stand there and allow his father to die. This is how I would have executed it, right? I explained to you yesterday many times how I would have kept Zod alive. I would have sucked him and Superman and the Kryptonians in the Phantom Zone, to be continued for Man of Steel 2. It would have been great. And then we involved Brainiac. It would have been very, very exciting. So what I would have done with the tornado sequence is Clark's about to save Jonathan. Jonathan does all this jazz. Clark hesitates, but then decides to save Jonathan. But because of that hesitation, he still fails to save his father. So Jonathan sacrifices himself. That's safe. But Clark still feels guilty for his father's death. Basically, it's the same thing, but it's more logically executed. And these were schoolboy errors. And it all comes from self-indulgence, everyone. Goyer hated the concept of kryptonite. So they couldn't use kryptonite in Man of Steel. They didn't use the shirt rip in Man of Steel. These are things that you have to use. And by the way, Gunn didn't use the open shirt thing in Superman. If I remember rightly, look, my memory is weeks ago when I watched it now. Maybe he did, but I can't remember it. It's the traditions of Superman that are going out the window in both of these movies, and it comes from self-indulgence. That's Man of Steel's and Batman vs. Superman and James Gunn's Superman's problem. Self-indulgent writer-directors, creatives who don't put the audience and the responsibility they have to that audience and that studio for investing faith and money in them. Because the elephant in the room is that, give or take a few million, Superman and Man of Steel are kind of like for like in the box office. Now let's get to the main point that I set on the title of this video. But before I do, please be patient. Please be patient. I want to say something else about critiquing, being a fan and critiquing what we love. I've been recently rewatching Quantum Leap. Now, in the first couple of seasons, they were calling Ziggy a male, which is the artificial intelligence that helps them. And then in the second half, the final few seasons, they were calling Ziggy a girl, a female. Now, this is, these are continuity errors. In Smallville, right, these are continuity errors. You don't kind of say, oh, this is bad, this sucks, because you love the show and you think it's not really a big deal, because it's not. In Smallville, for the first 7.5 seasons, there was no V for Veritas in the back window behind where Lex sits on his desk. Then from season 7B to the series finale, there was the Veritas insignia. This is a continuity error. They knew it was a continuity error, but they didn't care because they wanted to do this storyline. Now, of course, they could have put the V somewhere we haven't seen before, but they decided not to do that. They wanted it there in plain sight, so they could foreshadow for the rest of the season. I love the Veritas storyline, so that's why I'm not overly bothered about those continuity errors. But there's got to be a room to critique who we love and what we love. And when we don't do that, when we become echo chambers, we become as bad as the people making entertainment. Because directors these days like Denis Villeneuve, Matt Reeves, Zack Snyder, James Gunn don't like criticism. Every time they're critiqued, they deny that critique and they defend what they've done. Instead of saying, I can understand why some people didn't like Superman killing Zod. I get it. We understand. James Gunn being criticised for making Jor-El and Lara evil, right? Say, okay, I accept that. But they're not willing to look at themselves, look into the mirror and say, we're wrong. Mark Gatiss, who's written Doctor Who and Sherlock, criticised, moany, miserable old fans for critiquing current Doctor Who. Because these people will always blame us instead of looking at themselves, because they're an insular echo chamber. And that's what our fandoms have become, everyone. We're becoming as bad as them, and we just need to stop it. These fandom wars wouldn't be going on so deeply and toxically if we hadn't become these echo chambers. It's time for everyone to take a long, hard look at themselves in fandoms and in the entertainment industry and unite so it can become something better. Now, the conversations about the Superman box office continue. It cleared this weekend globally around 408 to 410, maybe 412 million dollars. It's doubled what it made in its opening previews over 2 weeks ago. This isn't very good. Let me be clear. This isn't as disastrous as something like Thunderbolts or Captain America New World Order, or whatever they changed the title to, or Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. The MCU Phase 4 and 5 had some disastrous box offices, and Superman is surpassing them. Superman has had solid holds domestically. But when you're making minuscule amounts, you're going to have small holds, you're going to have solid holds and small drops, right? It's not impressive. So now they keep on comparing Superman with other flops, basically saying this flop is doing better than the other flops. It's a joke. I'm surprised they haven't said, oh, Superman's been watched more than the dream season of Dallas, right? Or, it's more successful than Waterworld, Kevin Costner's movie that I adore, That was a flop. Or Arnold Schwarzenegger's Last Action Hero, which was also one of the biggest flops in history. How many more flops are you going to compare it to? So now, there's this whole discussion and debate and arguments and discourse in what would mean breaking even for Superman. Now the studio and the simps and even Grace Randolph are arguing that 500 million to 550 million is actually an even break, a break even for Superman. Now, I disagree with that strenuously. I don't think that's breaking even, right? Because I think that's what they spent on the fucking movie. And, breaking even. I mean, what does that really mean? Does that mean a profit? Because I don't think it breaks even on 500 to 550 million. They spent 225 million. I think they're lying. I think they spent around at least 300 million. Some people say more, right? So I think they spent about 300 million on production budget and 200 million on marketing budget. That's around 500 million, right? So if breaking even means just getting your money back, then fair enough. But if we're talking about profitability, then we're not here. It's not breaking even, right? We know that. But Grace Randolph made a bad point, but then made a good point in her video. What was the point of this Superman movie if it can't even beat Man of Steel's 670 million? If it can't even equal Man of Steel's 670 million. Here's the thing. Equaling Man of Steel isn't good enough. You made this movie, you fired Caval, you fired Snyder because you thought they did it wrong and you could do it better. You could fix all those so-called mistakes and make a more pure movie that all the fans would love. Instead, you were as self-indulgent as Zack Snyder was. And you made different mistakes. And because you fired Henry Cavill, and now you've had to bring Henry Cavill up in a podcast saying you spoke to him, poor man, and the day I got the job, WB was saying he was coming back, blah, 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 blah. We don't even know fact from fiction anymore. But somewhere along the line, we were fucking lied to. Now the question that has to be asked, and I've never asked it before properly on a video all of its own, did Cavill know it was a lie as well? That maybe can explain why he fucking took the news so well. It could be that Henry, out of no choice, because, when you're dealing with these fuckers, you have to do as they say, had to lie to the fans as well. We'll never know that either. But the reality is here, forget about the conversations about breaking even. They didn't invest nearly 500 million fucking dollars, like it or not, I think that's what they fucking invested, to break even. They invested to launch DCU. They invested to make a profit out of Superman. And here's the reality. They're not going to make a profit. Some people are saying, actually, that Superman is going to equal Man of Steel's box office. I see that as a financial impossibility. Now, I may end up with egg in my face. I may be wrong, and as usual, if I'm wrong, I'll put my hands up. Most of the time, I'm right, as you all know, because I get this biz, and sometimes I'm wrong. So having these arguments about what figure is breaking even is irrelevant, because at the end of the day, a Superman movie shouldn't be breaking even. Superman movie shouldn't be bragging that it's beaten the box office of Thunderbolts and the latest Captain America movie, Captain America 4, or the shitty Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. If you're saying, oh look at the holds, look at how small the drops are, look, it's doing better than these other crappy DCEU movies, better than these crappy Phase 4 and Phase 5 MCU movies, then you failed. I've been reading headlines from the Hollywood Reporter all morning. What a great success. What a great launch Superman has been for DC Studios. It's like opening up the Moscow Bugle's latest propaganda about their president, right? Putin. Lies, misinformation, trying to shed a good light on something bad. This is what the Hollywood Reporter are doing. They're lying. They're saying this is great, that this is a great launch, and this has been a really feel-good movie that everybody's loving. Not fucking true. The truth is about this summer this summer blockbuster season, we were promised a summer blockbuster season of old. We haven't got it. We've had shitty, underwhelming movies making shitty, underwhelming box office. This is not the summer blockbusters of old because the blockbusters are simply not good enough. They can't make entertainment, or they refuse to make good entertainment, and they have failed. This industry, this Hollywood industry, is in its fucking knees because they refuse to entertain people that are either politically self-indulgent or they're creatively self-indulgent, how I've explained to you. And instead of just making a fucking great Superman movie, they're having to lie about its box office, and they're having to lie and pretending that they're happy for this movie to break even. I'm going to make a little projection away from the box office because the box office won't end well. I do not believe it can equal Man of Steel, and even if it does, you fired all these people. You got rid of a great franchise, right? And a great Superman, and a great Wonder Woman, and a great Aquaman, and a great Cyborg, just to equal something that you think was a failure. And isn't it interesting, when Man of Steel was kind of, limping to 670, everyone said it was a failure. But now, apparently, according to one box office analyst, an amateur one called Luis Fernando, another guy who blocked me a long time ago because these people don't like being held to account, he said, remember this is a box office analyst, he said box office doesn't matter. Now they're telling us that Letterboxd matters, having a million members, the fastest ever for a film apparently. Basically, what is it? Letterboxd. Is it Letterboxd, right? Those Letterboxd people, right, know nothing about fucking movies. They're just people that have seen too much BTS, DVD extras footage and think they know all about fucking movies, and they don't. When the final box office comes in, and I think we're looking at the very most 550, 450 to 550. So they're gonna finish under, they're going to finish under 100 million short of Man of Steel, right? That's what I think. But they're still projecting. Some people are still projecting and lying that it can equal Man of Steel. Even that isn't a win. But anyway, we'll wait to see what happens. But when the box office comes, and they will not equal Man of Steel anyway, it's not worth having that discussion. I believe either Zaslav, Gunn, or Peter Safran is going to be fired. And this is who I think is going to be fired out of these people. I believe that Peter Safran will resign, but really be fired. Someone's head has to always roll in this situation. Now let's think back to Man of Steel. Whose head rolled after Man of Steel? It was David Goyer. They can't admit that they don't want Gunn. So Gunn has to stay. They have to pretend they're happy with Gunn because that's what they're saying. They're happy with Gunn. They won't get rid of Zaslav. It's difficult to get rid of Zaslav. I don't see it, but who knows? So the reality is what we're going to see here. The person who can actually go is Peter Safran. And that would be, I suppose that would be a good thing. That would be an interesting thing because who replaces him? That's an interesting thing as well. And I think Matt Reeves is a good bet for sure. Don't be surprised if it's Kevin Feige. We've had this discussion already, of course. But I just want you to be ready for this week. Because this week, they're going to announce the next movie that Gunn is doing after Superman. And I also believe they're going to announce who their DCU Batman is this week. Watch this space, and the first place that will react to that news is me here on Movies TV Mad. I don't buy subscribers, I don't buy followers, I don't bullshit you. I point the camera in my face, a cheap 50 quid HD camera with a built-in mic, and I say what I want to say. And that's the best freedom of all. When people don't care what you've got to say, you can say anything you want. You can speak your own truth from your heart. I inspire you, I advise you to do the same. Until tomorrow, have a lovely day.